welcome to the Sim Racing Perspectives podcast for June 10th, 2018. I'm here with Alex from The Extra Mile.
What's up, guys?
And Mike from Sim Racing 604.
Hello, hello.
I'm your host, Davy Jones, and today we're delighted to have two special guests from Sector3 Studios in Sweden. First, we have Alex Hodgkinson.
Hello, everyone.
And we also have Georg Ortner.
Hey everybody, how's it going?
Now, Alex, I'll start with you. I wanted to get you and our Georg on the show, and we're delighted to have you both on, and we're looking forward to this discussion. I was introduced to you when you first appeared with Paul Jeffrey from Race Department late last year. And if I recall correctly, you've been a driving instructor at Silverstone, was it so?
Yeah, and other places. And that was not sort of a bit of a toe in the water thing. That was my previous career. So since 2010, which is something that followed on from doing real life racing myself. Yeah, I got into instructing on driving experience days and corporate days, basically all over the UK.
Oh, really?
And yeah, and I did that as a full-time career for 7 years. And I've come straight into Sector 3 off the back of doing that.
Oh, really? I'm fascinated, for example, from your conversations with Paul. How did you then, if you can briefly outline, how did you get into the driving instructing? And then how did that bring you to Sector 3 to do physics in a sim?
Oh, that's going to be very fun to make that concise, but I'll try. So, I got into the driving instructing because I was racing Formula Fords and sort of various club races like MX5s and a little bit of a brick car in the UK. Yeah. And basically off the back of having racing experience, you sort of get a job sat in the passenger seat. Yeah. Conveying knowledge and sort of getting people up to speed on track. As a hobby at the time, I was part of the Virtua Le Mans or VLM modding group, and we made the Le Mans circuit for R Factor. Mm-hmm. So this was about 10 years ago now, and also the Prototype C mod, which was massive, and I was responsible for the physics in that. Okay. So I did sort of in the realms of about 150 cars, physics for about 150 cars for that. Yeah. And then that was just really sort of it was just a hobby. But I kept in contact with some of the guys, especially Anthony, actually, the sound, our sound guy. And it just sort of happened that I was asked about, just over a year ago, would I be interested in getting involved in Sector 3 and working with the physics again? And I thought, yeah, that sounds interesting. Why not? So it was a big change, as you can imagine. I still work every now and then, sort of mostly at weekends, at various race circuits. So I still actually have the real life, experience. I'm still doing that. Yeah. I'm still doing that sort of teaching. Okay. But 9 to 5 during the week, I am a Sector 3 man.
Okay. So you're based in the UK and you're technically working remotely, as they say, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm based in the UK, and I'm only 15 minutes from the front gate of Silverstone, where I am, which is great because if I want to go and find out something firsthand, I can just nip down the road and I can actually go and take pictures of cars and look at cars and figure out what spring rates cars are running and whether they sort of the body roll is right. Yeah, compared to what we're doing sort of in game, really. So all the time I can keep my finger on the pulse, and I'm connected to what's actually really happening all the time, which is really nice.
And do you have a engineering background? Did you study engineering at university or something? Or
I did. I did motorsport engineering at university.
Oh, really?
And yeah, that was at my local university. Yeah. Which is something that I sort of put in the back pocket, and I got into the driving, and I sort of used the motorsport engineering as a sort of plan B. I thought I wanted to be a driver, everyone does when they're 18. Mm-hmm. And when that didn't sort of quite work out, I just sort of kept it in the back pocket there, and still sort of kept all the knowledge and kept all the books and just sort of kept my eye on it all the time. But one thing that I have used that for that's actually quite interesting, and I've not told very many people in this community at least about it, is that I've used a lot of my engineering knowledge and experience to actually build my own race car from basically scratch.
Oh, really?
So maybe at some point I'll share pictures. I like to be a little bit secretive about it because it's not a finished car yet. So I don't say too much. But for example, I taught myself how to rebuild engines, and how to sort of calculate suspension geometry. And actually, the thing that I'm one of the most proud of is that I taught myself how to make carbon fiber. So I made a complete car in carbon fiber bodywork.
Really?
So my experience is very much like hands-on. Like I've really driven a lot of racing cars and worked with a lot of racing cars. So the physics of it is, it's all sort of tied in. It's I like to think that I've got a bit of a different approach and a different angle that other people can't necessarily bring to it.
Yeah, I have a friend actually. He's big into windsurfing and he wants to build his own windsurfing board, and he has been talking endlessly about fabricating his own carbon fiber and looking up videos of it, and he is an engineer himself. So that's fascinating. So you have the motorsport engineering university, and then you have the real world driving, and then you're building your own car, and then you have the simulation physics. That's fascinating. But still,
fingers in many pies, hey?
Yeah, but at the core, it's still motorsport, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's just motorsport from all different angles.
Yeah.
So, in fact, you should send your friend in my direction, because I think I'd probably like to talk with him. And he'd like to talk with me.
Yeah. Oh, God bless him. He'd probably bore you to death, Alex.
Not if I bored him first.
Yeah, maybe you'd knock each other out, so to speak. And Georg, if I move on to you, I've been following you for a long time, and your channel is great, by the way, and including the mountain biking content.
Yeah.
And I know you've been on Billy Strange's show, which I'll link to below in the description, and many who sim race and many who play RaceRoom are similar with you, Georg. But Georg, can you tell us what exactly it is you're doing at Sector 3?
So at Sector3 Studios, I'm mainly involved with the marketing. So, and that includes also social media management and stuff like that. But I started there basically as a video editor. I was creating media and content a long time before I joined Sector 3, or Simbin before that. I was posting my videos and artworks and screenshots all over the community. And then I did that for a very long time. And I got noticed by the guys over at Simbin for a video I did. And that got me basically the job. And that's still what I'm doing mainly, creating videos for new content and all sorts of things that are connected with media.
Wow, that's interesting. So I remember you told Billy the story that you had done a video and you sent it in and you got noticed. And in a way, the theme seems to be similar to what Alex has talked about. Because Alex, you said you knew somebody called Anthony, was it? And Anthony,
that's right. Yeah.
Is Anthony the sound guy at Sector 3?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's kind of by getting yourself noticed, and so that's fascinating actually, because usually it's
there's a lot of people coming from the community and the modding community in particular who are now working within the industry.
Yeah, and you get a lot of that as well with games like, for example, World of Warcraft and League of Legends, this kind of thing, that people who are passionate in the community end up working at the studios. That's fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great platform to be creative and show your creativity and show your talent.
Yeah, that's true. And I guess in a way, the kind of possibilities are endless. And in particular now with the kind of graphics and audio on so many aspects of simulation improving.
Absolutely.
Now, so I wanted to, Mike, Alex and we wanted to talk about RaceRoom in general, if we can, because we're all long-term fans of RaceRoom. So I have some notes here that the guys and I kind of collated as a series of questions. So recently, in terms of the cars, and I know that Alex, you've talked about this with Paul from RaceRoom. So you recently launched the 911 GT3R, the BMW M6 GT3, the McLaren 650S, and the AMG GT3, and also the Callaway Corvette C7. And then you have the Porsche 911 GT3 Cup and also the Cayman GT4 Club Sport. And I know from the interview I had with Robert Wiesenmuller from RaceRoom that you also have this new classic DTM Mercedes coming, and also some new WTCR cars replacing the WTCC. But can you talk about at all if some of the cars that may be coming to RaceRoom, for example Porsche or anything, if there's anything that you can tell us about at this point?
You mean other cars that are coming besides those that you just mentioned?
Yes.
Well, there's not much really we can say at the moment, but we are fully focused on getting the WTCR cars out there.
Yep.
We're trying our best to get all of them in the game, in the sim. And those are actually a couple of cars. It's the Honda, the Hyundai, and what else is there? Alpha, and yeah, we're trying to get most of them in the game, or all of them if possible. So that's quite a commitment already. And then we know for sure that we're gonna deliver 3 more Porsches this year, because that's the deal. 3 cars every year. We delivered the first 3 last year, and we're gonna try to deliver the next 3 this year. And we're not quite sure yet which ones it's gonna be, but maybe you have some favorites.
Well, personally for me would be the 911 RS or the GT LM car.
Mm-hmm.
Mike, Alex?
Yeah, it's the RSR for me. I mean, it's kind of ubiquitous in sim racing at this point. Everybody loves it, but I think it would be a fantastic addition to RaceRoom as well.
I would agree with Mike here on that one. The RSR is one of my favorites.
Yeah, that is a cool car indeed. But we, of course, we always have to see what fits into the game, what makes sense from a gameplay perspective. Because if you only have one car in a class, then might not be the best choice. But who says there might not be other cars in that class coming in the more distant future? So let's see.
That is true. And now that I think of it, there are also options of some classic Porsches. I did a video recently about Magnus Walker, and I went from the 911 from 63 all the way up to the present day. So there are a series of options, but of course they would have to be added as part of a series, so you could race them in the class of their own, just like you say, Georg. So
yeah, there's plenty of classic Porsches that are absolutely gorgeous and would be a great addition to RaceRoom.
So the Porsches will drop this year. Are the TCR cars coming this year as well?
Yes, that is the plan. Yeah, shouldn't be too long actually until those are out. It's always depending approvals and licensing situation, but they're getting there.
Excellent. And just had a question for you guys, and I actually should preface this question by saying that I recently spent some time racing Paul Ricard in the GTR3 class in RaceRoom, and I just wanted to tell you guys what a absolute triumph this game is. It really, or this sim is, I should say. It really is fantastic. I just got taken completely out of reality, and I love the force feedback. I love the sound. I love the VR experience, and I just wanted to congratulate you guys. What an awesome title RaceRoom is. So with that in mind, what are some things you guys, when you look at RaceRoom, when you drive RaceRoom, what are some cars or tracks or any content you've created that you think, yes, we've done it right. This is so perfect. This is something I absolutely love. Excuse me. And something you're very excited about driving in RaceRoom.
So if I take that one, I'd say all of the things that are in progress at the minute, to be perfectly honest. So everything that you haven't seen is, I really feel like everything's moved 2 steps on since, well, in terms of physics wise, for me, within the last 6 months, I really feel like everything has taken 2 steps forward. So we're just talking about the TCR class, and I'm really excited and how I've already got that progressing, and how we're progressing with it already. I envisage that this is going to be a real hit. Yeah, the physics have just come together like so nicely. It's a real pleasure to be working on.
Yeah, I would have to agree with Alex there. For me, it's always the content that is coming out last that is the most exciting, because we're always, developing and evolving, making steps forward. And every time I think, yeah, this is just fantastic, it can't get much better, then Alex comes around with the next work in progress, and it feels even better. So it's always the last car that is in progress or that is coming out that is the most exciting for me. But on the other hand, there's the Nordschleife that we have in game that is just absolutely mind-blowingly accurate and looks awesome and feels fantastic to drive on. And it's one of my favorite tracks, so I'll always go back on that track with various cars, really.
It's awesome.
In terms of the cars, and I've seen this this comment many times, for example, in posts about RaceRoom on Race Department. For example, if you're racing GT3, there's no option to filter cars. So would there ever be an option to filter races so you could set up an AI race based on cars, let's say, that are introduced in the last 2 or 3 years?
Yeah, it's definitely something that we want to do. I would also really appreciate an option like that, and it has been on the list for a while. You can already do it in multiplayer, of course. You can choose
That's
exactly
true.
which cars you want to race. But for single player, it's definitely something that we want to do, and I hope that we get around to do it in the very near future.
So, question for, I guess, Alex too. So the force feedback, you mentioned like the recent cars are your most favorite, and I agree, they're just phenomenal. So as things kind of improve within Sector 3, and you bring along your approach to creating good force feedback and better physics in the cars and things like that, is there sort of a plan to pull the previous content along, like as the approach to creating content changes? Do you also go back and look at the older content and sort of upgrade that?
Yeah, definitely. Of course, time's a big constraint when it comes to doing that, but I've definitely sort of got it already in motion, that I've got a bit of a strategy already. And actually, we have actually already been working on updating a few of the older classes. So yeah, you can definitely expect to see more of that. In fact, there's a nice package that we're putting together at the moment for a certain old class that again is something that we're really sort of very proud of. So yeah, that should be seeing people's screens pretty soon, hopefully.
Excellent. And you mentioned Anthony is sort of the genius behind the sounds. RaceRoom, I think without question, has the best sounds in all of sim racing. It's just phenomenal. And is Anthony alone in that department, or does he work with a team? And can you talk a little bit, and perhaps we could have him on at some point onto the podcast, but can you tell us a little bit about Anthony's approach to creating these phenomenal sounds we get from RaceRoom?
So Anthony is, of course, the guy who makes the sounds, who is the audio engineer, but he works together with our programmers, and in particular, I think it's Robert Holm that helped him creating a sound engine, or constantly improve the sound engine to where he needs it to be, so he can work at his best level. So it's not only the audio engineer, but it's also some programming assistants that is improving the engine to make the sounds as great as they are. And the way Anthony creates the sounds, I'm not an expert, but of course he tries to capture the cars on track as much as he can. Of course, there's not always the chance that he can do that, but we try to get him on the track as much as we can and put the recorder in the sound. He has pretty expensive audio recorder that he then mounts in the cars, and this is always done in collaboration with the teams. So for example, we were at the Sachsenring last year. Actually, that one was recorded by Alex Hummler, but regardless, we were working with, now don't let me lie, which team was it again? Was it Roller Racing? One of the GT Masters teams, anyhow. They invited us, and so we were able to mount this recording device in the car, and that lets us record some high quality sound footage, audio files, that then is being used by Anthony. He processes them and makes them work and sound great in game.
Okay.
It's quite an interesting situation as well with how the sounds work with the physics, because for example, a few weeks ago we had a bit of a focus on the gear change and how the car sounds during the gear changes, and Anthony sort of described, I mean, he's got a proper musician's ear, like, is what I call it, like, to the point that he'll say, oh, have you heard this? And to him it's something that's like really an obvious sound, and I have to listen 2 or 3 times and I'm like, oh yeah, sort of thing. He's an absolute, it's like a magician. But Anthony drew my attention to gear changes, and we worked together and made some tweaks, and we basically, well, actually, I think that was in the GT3 cars, but that hasn't been rolled into a patch yet. But yeah, we basically, Anthony is sort of 10 times happy with now how the gear change sounds are for the GT3 cars. So all the time, if something changes in the physics, it has an impact immediately on the sounds, which is quite interesting, and it's something that I didn't anticipate at first.
True, of course. The physics have so much influence on many departments, as well on the force feedback. Of course, you can have the best force feedback engine and code, but if the physics are not there, then it's not going to feel great. So yeah, physics, of course, very, very important.
Really interesting. I have another question about the sounds, because that's always something that's very important to me personally in games. I'm really happy with the sounds in RaceRoom, and I'm quite impressed with them. Is there something that you guys have talked about internally in the future of the sound engine that might be another revolutionary step, so to speak? I know it's probably more of fine-tuning and small increments and optimizing the sound engine, but is there something that you guys would like to do in the future in terms of sound that you could not do for whatever reason up until today?
That's a good question.
Probably more for Anthony.
That does sound like one for Anthony, yeah, for sure.
I'm sure Anthony has a million things that he would like to improve and get.
I'm sure he could give you a very good answer for that. I'm a little bit on a blank there, but I'm pretty sure that you'd start the timer now, and Anthony'd be going in about 20 minutes.
Oh, I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, nerd out on sound related stuff, and then
yes,
a final question related to sound. So Robert mentioned the classic Mercedes DTM cars were coming as part of a 30th anniversary pack of Mercedes in DTM. So in terms of gathering the sounds for those cars, did Anthony or somebody go and find actual versions of those cars and then physically record the internal and external sounds?
Actually, I'm not entirely sure for those cars how the sounds came to be, but I mean, Anthony has a huge library of audio files he has collected over the years, and stemming from various sources. So I'm not entirely sure. I don't think they were recorded by him. Maybe we got files by Mercedes themselves, because they are really, really supportive in the development. So that could be, but don't quote me on that. I'm actually not sure.
I know for sure that for at least one of the cars, Mercedes did send some sound recordings across, and they were obviously from their library somewhere, because a few of them were actually of the engine on a dyno, which was quite a thing to, you can't imagine very many people have been in the Mercedes HQ with a sound recorder pointing at a really top secret engine on a dyno. So that was like gold to get hold of.
I didn't know that manufacturers actually would do that. They would actually send a sound recording. I always thought it was on the basis of somebody from the development studio going by invite and actually doing it. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's not the norm. It's not always the case, but Mercedes, of course, have a huge background and in media, and they have a big library of data. They send us not also audio, but also they have send us laser scans of the 1995 Mercedes, which was extremely helpful. So that car is extremely accurate, and I don't know if you guys have tried it yet. You can drive it for free in RaceRoom right now in the competition. It's really, really spot on, that car.
Okay, yeah, Robert mentioned it.
Well, guys, just a question to either of you or both of you about RaceRoom, kind of the future moving forward with RaceRoom. Obviously, there's a bunch more content planned, and there's talk of the Unreal Engine, there's talk of DirectX improvements and things like that. Is the plan to just sort of use RaceRoom as the base and just keep growing it, and there's no next step foreseen except for improving RaceRoom, or is there plans somewhere down the line, and we don't need to get into specifics, but is there plans to release a RaceRoom 2 or anything like that?
Well, as you may know, we have a partner studio, let's call it, with Simbin in the UK, which is newly formed studio about a year ago or so, which is actually the brother of our CEO here in Sweden. And they are working on the new tech with Unreal Engine 4. And yeah, their title is GTR3. So that's the new title, which is not a Sector 3 project, but it's related in a sense. But we here at Sector 3 Studios, we are 100% committed to the RaceRoom project and title right now. And it's a thing that is constantly evolving. And I don't know exactly. I mean, it's not my my decision or my. I'm not so involved in the business department, but maybe at some point we will make a cut and say, okay, this can now be called RaceRoom 2. I don't know. Right now, it's planned to keep developing RaceRoom in the current platform, of course, with options of new tech coming in the future. But that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a new title. It's just going to be an evolution of what we now know as RaceRoom.
Sure, sure. And Alex, question to you. How do you decide exactly what to improve upon with RaceRoom? You talk about you're constantly making improvements, but the title is so good as is. How do you decide, what to focus on? Do we focus on, the force feedback engine, the physics engine, the sound engine, the visuals? How do you sort of zero that in? Is that something you solicit from the fans, like from people who drive it and kind of give feedback, or how do you decide?
Well, the way that I'm deciding is really I have got certain parameters defined for each cars, and the more real data that I can collect, and the more that I can understand the way that the physics engine interprets it, the closer I can sort of get it to match the real data, really, in a way. So effectively, what I'm really trying to do is just bring it in closer and closer and closer to the real thing. And sort of eliminate the guesswork and the fudge values that are in there. So yeah, that's really the way that I do it. It's all quite a natural evolution, and I'd say that there isn't really one particular at the moment. There isn't really one sort of particular direction that I'm focusing on. It's very much a case of it's a bit here and it's a bit there, and it's a little tweak here and a little tweak there, and it's just all the time sort of evolving and growing. And maybe initially over the first 6 months there was a lot of that, and now it's very much a sort of like a tweak, really, rather than a big step. To sort of fill you in on what I did initially, I built a huge massive spreadsheet to simulate in Excel suspension geometry, and it literally took me 3 months to build this thing. And what I can do now is I can make a suspension file, really, because the way that it works actually in the sim is that all the suspension arms and wishbones and where the springs are is all defined. Like they're actually physically points that the game uses. And really I've made it sort of make sense in engineering terms, so that the suspension is right, really. So I sort of built this whole system to do that. That's up and running, and that's part of a big reason as to why I'm so happy about how all the latest cars are. But really, it's a case of just a little bit here and a little bit there, and there's a lot of like watching videos, and then we have this, the real driver loop, and there's a lot of listening to that, and just small bits here and small bits there, but over weeks and months it ends up adding up to quite a big difference.
I have another question about the future of RaceRoom, which is probably very bright from what I hear right now. Is there any interest in including mixed surface racing, maybe in the distant future, something like rallycross or anything in that direction? I mean, I know it's hard enough to get tarmac physics right, and soft surfaces are probably a whole different kind of beast. But was there any talk outside company about that, or?
Well, there are no immediate plans for anything like that, but never say never. Who knows what's happening in a year or two. There are always new opportunities that are opening up, and we are certainly open for all kinds of things. And I think rallycross or something similar would probably be quite fun in RaceRoom. But right now we have no plans as such.
Awesome. Yeah, I think it could be pretty fun as well, but I can understand that there are more pressing matters on the table. Another thing that I would like to ask about is the AI. The AI in RaceRoom stands out a little bit. It's very high quality, very fun to race with. What kind of, or what efforts have gone into the AI, if you can talk about that in your respective fields, to make it that great?
Yeah, that's a very long list of improvements and details that have been added to the engine to improve AI racing, and it's been a big challenge, of course, because we have so many different cars in RaceRoom. It's one thing to create one perfect AI for, let's say, one sort of cars, that maybe open wheel cars or whatever, or GT cars, but then touring car racing is different from that, and prototypes are different, and multi-class and all these kinds of things needs a lot of work, and over the years it's been a constant process of improving it. And yeah, there's details like when you chase an AI very closely, it gets a bit nervous, or it tries to defend the line, or is more prone to make mistakes, and all these details have been added in the past years. So it's a really good experience that stands at the end of this process.
So if I understand that correctly, this is not one AI module, so to speak, that drives all the cars, but you code different AIs for different race classes. Is that correct?
Well, the code is the same, right? But then every track has an AI file, and every car has an AI file as well. I mean, the AI is driving with the game physics, and they can be tweaked so they work better, and every track is different. So there's many things that are involved, not just on the code side, but also on the track and the car side as well.
Very interesting. And looking into the future again, is there something AI-wise that you would like to add still, maybe to make it more human, more prone to errors? Or do you think that you're happy with where the AI is right?
I mean, I would say there's always something to improve. What we have recently added is a sort of a randomizer for racing performance, because we didn't want the same car or the same team or the same AI driver to finish first in the championship every round. So it's now a bit different going from qualifying into race. The performance varies a bit, sort of like a day-to-day performance factor. But yeah, I mean, what I would really like to see, of course, is multi-class in single player. There, it's very, very important that the lapping maneuvers are smooth, and the AI doesn't get held up by the slower class. And I mean, this is already a bit in progress. It's been a bit in the freezer, this project, but I hope we can go back to it very soon.
Really cool.
Back to Alex. Alex, you were talking about your Excel document, and for example, where you have the suspension geometry for many types of cars. In terms of the open wheel cars, which are pretty much fantasy cars, for example, like the Formula US, and the cars are really good, by the way. How do you work out the geometry for those cars, or what's your touch point?
So I'd say that really following good engineering principles is really the sort of the starting point, and a tape measure and to go and look at racing cars is another important thing that I've done. So I've actually looked at a few of the single seaters and been up at Silverstone and been up at Donington Park and actually taken a tape measure out and just sort of like said to the owners, do you mind if I just have a bit of a look and, you know, just measure things up just to make sure that it really makes sense. And yeah, that's really it. So the interesting thing as well is that from a suspension point of view, a lot of the single seaters are very similar. They're just scaled up or scaled down, really. I mean, that's how they actually are. That's how the real cars are. So once you've sort of got one that's about right and doing about the right sort of thing, you can very much scale it up and scale it down, which is interesting. But it gives you a lot of chance to really get it really right, because you can learn something in one car that maybe makes a little bit of an improvement, and because it's only scaled up for another one, you can scale it up, and therefore you can kind of develop quite quickly.
And in terms of, let's say you bring in a new 2 or 3 new GT3 cars, and then you upgrade the physics for the whole GTR class. Does that involve also tweaking the AI? If, let's say, the performance of a particular car is either increased or decreased, is tweaking the AI also part of that?
Yeah, definitely. So that's something that I have to be careful of, actually, because especially in the GTR3 class, because we have got so many cars. If I make one little change, it's effectively we have to press reset on the AI button for that particular car and start again. So it's a little bit of a reason as to why maybe I would have liked to have started work or start to put out another update for the GTR3 class. But but one of the reasons that I've sort of held off from it is because currently the balance of performance we think is really, really very good, possibly as good as it's been, thanks to the whole test team that we've got, really, that are great, and also the way that the AI are as well, and they can handle the car, and they're all nicely balanced, and there isn't one car that's sort of running away with it. So effectively, when I make one change to a car, no matter how small it may be, in effect we have to reset and start again with the AI. So it's something to be quite careful about on our side.
And in terms of the AI on a general basis, and it's something that occurred to me when setting up a single player race. Let's say you have strength from, you say, 95, 100 or so on, and then you have the adaptive. And I've noticed there are videos about how to do it. There are posts on Race Department in terms of, if you, let's say there's a major update and there's a 5 or 6 gigabyte download, you should delete your adaptive AI file and then you should start it again. And if you want to do it correctly, to train the adaptive AI correctly, you should start with a practice, start with a qualifying. From you guys, from an experience, and even to Mike and Alex, what do you guys do as a rule? Do you set a numerical strength that you're comfortable with, or do you use the adaptive? What would you advise a player to do?
I'll jump in there. I usually use a numerical value because I use it as sort of a benchmark for my skills. So typically I start out a little bit below 100. I don't know if it's true or not, but I consider 100 to be somewhat lifelike in terms of lap times. And so I'll kind of use it as a benchmark. So if I'm learning a track, I might turn it down to say 90 or something like that and run until I can turn it up. And if I at any point get above 100, then I consider myself quite proficient at that track or proficient with that car. So that's kind of my approach. I have tried the adaptive, but again, I like to have that numerical value just sort of as a barometer of how I'm doing, how I'm progressing with the game.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm pretty much the same there. I generally, in all sims, keep the AI around 100 because I consider that to be as Mike said, the most realistic, in air quotes, value, and try to calibrate myself. But I have another question for Alex. It's very rare that I can talk to someone who is so knowledgeable about car physics and the engineering part. And what I'm interested in is where do you see the big differences between modern race cars in terms of their suspension setup and cars from previous generations, maybe from 20, 30 or even longer years ago? I know that the double wishbone suspension, for example, has been around quite a while, but Are there any fundamental differences apart from aero, maybe, that you talk about between modern race cars and vintage cars?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I think if you really look at it, then a lot of things have not changed at all. But I think all the progression has come through aero, through suspension refinement, and most of the improvements and most of the lap times are actually from the tire technology, which is actually always historically been really where most of the improvements have come. And another thing is engine drivability, because nowadays, it's quite ordinary that say a GT3 car unrestricted might make 600 horsepower, and it'll be a nice drivable smooth 600 horsepower. But if you look back 35 years, Porsche 962 had 610 horsepower. Well, a 956 if we talk 35 years, but with so much turbo lag, it would just not compare to something nowadays. So I think really suspension sort of geometry really hasn't changed so much in the last 30 years. Like if you talk top line, like a real good, let's keep to sort of in the last 40 years, I'd say, like a real good top line sports car suspension from 40 years ago, the geometry is pretty much like a modern GT3 car now. So, but what's different is that dampers and the way maybe that springs are understood is quite different, because you only have to go to a historic meeting and or maybe look at some videos of races from 35, 40 years ago, and you'll see that curbs were just not anything to go near at all. They were just well avoided. But nowadays, drivers will just bash over curbs and sort of think nothing of it. So damper technology has really come on a long way. I think that's a real big difference. So if I were to go back and start looking at historic stuff, you basically make it just not as good, and you just sort of dumb it down a bit, and you make it so it can't quite cope with certain situations in the way that a modern car can. And I think that engine behavior is quite important, because, well, the thing that I always think about is, before I raced cars, I raced karts, and I raced shifter karts and raced on long circuits. And so I grew up with something that had a small engine and a really peaky power band. And to someone that drives modern race cars now, or modern road cars, in the present day, like a power band is like something that doesn't exist. It's sort of like, I mean, if I described to you an engine that basically did nothing until it got to 7,000 revs, and then all its power came on like a switch until it got to 10.5, and then it went flat again, you'd think, well, that's weird. What's that all about? But that, when you talk about a power band like that, I think that's how historic race engines with really hot cams were. So, on the flip side of that, a modern race engine is really drivable and smooth, and you could probably, noise aside and power aside, you could probably bimble down the road in it and take it to the shops. It would be sort of quite nice to you. It wouldn't want to bite your hand off. And then when it comes to tires as well, I think that like a modern race tire compared to an older tire is quite different, in the, in fact, this is something that occasionally I see debated in forums and whatnot, that a modern racing slick does offer a heck of a lot of grip, but they are quite peaky. So what I mean by that is that they will grip to a point and then they'll go off like a switch. And that's something that maybe in a sim people would sort of get a little bit baffled by it sometimes, but that literally is the way that it is. That at the limit of grip, it can be on a bit of a knife edge. But then if we're talking about historic stuff again, they were not like that. If you talk about cross-ply tires from 40 years ago, they would sort of give a reasonable amount of grip still at quite a lot of slip angle when you got a four-wheel drift on, and then if you pushed it a bit harder, it just sort of gradually give up. There wouldn't be this knife edge sort of thing. So a modern tire has more peak grip, but it drops off faster, whereas a historic tire has less peak grip but is more forgiving sort of around the limit. Does that make sense?
Interesting. So would you say that modern race tires kind of sacrifice drivability a little bit in order to achieve a higher grip level overall?
Yeah, that's definitely.
Yeah.
That's definitely what I'd say. Although there's probably been a bit of a movement away from that again, when we, over the last 10 years, we've seen more and more race series have a spec tire, and they tend to come back away from peak performance and tend to go more in towards drivability than being a real sort of peaky, hard to handle tire. So that's something that's sort of quite interesting.
How different is it for you to get data from vintage? I mean, I know you have cars in the game that are from 70s at least, maybe even older. And do you run a modern tire on that car, or do you try to replicate what the tires did back in the days?
So with the historic stuff, we try to keep it so that they have got like effectively an historic tire. You can imagine getting data like trying to get blood from a stone. It's really very hard indeed. So we have to. I mean, even if you talk to people now that run historic cars, they really run a sort of approximation of a historic tire, which isn't necessarily right, but it's kind of almost is, but it's closer to a modern tire than the sort of in period tire. So when it comes to that, really, there's a lot of talking to drivers, and I'm quite lucky that I've got a few sort of contacts that can sort of put me on the right sort of track with it. But yeah, there's a lot of head scratching and a bit of approximation and a bit of a maybe if we do it like this and if we do it like that. but to be perfectly honest, with the historic things, with all the historic cars that we've got currently in game, all of those are Karsten's work. So Karsten, who I took over from, in the sort of handover process that we had before Karsten left the way, we did run through literally everything. So we had, I think one day we spent about 10 hours on Skype just discussing and talking through and making sure that all the facts and everything were all just, we were on the same sort of song sheet and everything made sense and I understood everything and he told me everything. So what he'd done with those is really started a clean sheet, and it wasn't based on a modern race tire. It was a completely new interpretation of how really he thought a historic tire should be, and I think he's done a really good job with it.
Really interesting. So would you say that you prefer to work on a modern race car in comparison to a vintage car because there's more fresh and current data available? Or do you have a favorite in general between modern and vintage?
Well, that's a good question. Again, what's really strange that I found is that sometimes when you have a lot of data from a modern car, you have all the data from a modern car, it can be a lot harder to do because you're not sort of filling in the blanks with what you think's right.
Yeah.
You've been told, and you have to sort of make it work. And we talked about the Mercedes DTM cars that are in the competition at the moment. Now, let me tell you that I'd estimate it took me about 6 weeks to get them right. And that included about 3 weeks of working on them and nothing else. Now, that was a major effort. I just couldn't quite get them right. They were very, very edgy and just would bite just when, and eventually it got sorted out. But yeah, that was very hard. But I mean, I suppose you probably count now a 2003 car as historic. So, but personally, I really enjoy a mix, to be honest. I've got very much a soft spot for, I mean, you probably guessed because I was talking about them just a minute ago, but cars from 35, 40 years ago, sports cars. So really, because the rule book was very, 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 very brief and the cars were stupidly quick. So it really appeals to me. And I mean, if we go further back than that, it's all brilliant. I mean, I definitely wouldn't say no. And I'd really relish the challenge if we were suddenly told that we were going to do a 1906 Daimler Benz, you know, that'd be brilliant.
Oh yes,
so
please.
yeah, bring that on. Let's do it. You know, it'd be amazing.
Yeah.
You know, because the way that the physics engine works, like we could do it. Like there's no reason not to. It's you know, there's a way that we could simulate the suspension, the tires, the engine. You know, I'm sure Anthony would like to make that chug noise.
And a classic horn as well, yeah.
and the honk horn, yeah, indeed. So,
and for a car like the 95 DTM Mercedes, sorry, Georg mentioned earlier, prior to releasing that, is there a QA process? Does somebody at Mercedes have to check it? Are you lucky enough to find a driver who actually drove the car? How do you actually confirm that your estimated simulation, shall I say, is as close as possible, or is it just feel when you're actually testing the car yourself?
So, well, we got that's one of the cars that we got a lot of numbers and we got the laser scan for it. So that means that all the suspension is right. We got all the numbers for it. So it was very much like a case of make all the numbers fit the car and it will be right, basically. We've got all the aero data and the car dyno sheets, you know, everything. So really the only room for error there really was in the tire. And I mean, we weren't lucky enough to actually be able to run a sort of in-driver loop with it, but you know, we sort of did a lot of testing and just ran it progressively, and over about, that was one of the cars that took about 6 weeks to develop. And yeah, just sort of kept tweaking it and tweaking it and tweaking it. And yeah, we just sort of got it to a point that we were happy with it.
Okay.
And then drew a line.
And back to the AI, if I may. If you guys, Alex and Georg, from Sector 3 yourselves, if you're offline racing, what settings are you using? Are you using adaptive or 100%, or if I might ask?
Well, it really depends on the car that I'm driving. Some classes, the AI is a little bit quicker or a little bit slower, but I usually tend to be somewhere between 105 and 115.
Okay.
But what I usually do when I'm racing offline is that I'm starting from the back and I'm trying to fight my way through the field. I think it's the most fun thing to do. So I usually go a little bit lower than what would be matching speed to my speed. So yeah, but I would say between 105 and 115 is my go-to setting. Yeah,
I'd say I'm somewhere sort of about there as well. But what I like to do myself when racing offline is set the AI to be, so the quickest AI are just a couple of tenths quicker than me, like, and that will be it. So that I like, so when I'm racing offline, it's literally like there's a carrot dangling, and it's always a massive challenge. And I know I'm not going to win, but like I've got something to aim for, like, and there's this real sort of incentive to like be absolutely on it. I almost feel in a way when racing online, if I get when racing offline, once I've got to the front, it's a bit sort of like, oh, they're not going to fight back now, kind of thing, you know. Sort of, yeah. So I like myself to just really have that, like, that basically impossible challenge is what sort of appeals to me.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, there was a story on Race Department a few days ago, and it was from, I think it was Jean-Francois was talking about, I think it was from him, that you were talking about upgrading your DirectX graphics engine prior to upgrading to Unreal Engine, which is connected to the Simbin development in the UK that Georg mentioned earlier. Now, I don't know if you guys can talk, but I just wanted to bring it up because it's interesting. But is this DirectX upgrade, is it to improve performance and better support VR? Because I've seen references in the comments on that article that, for example, DirectX 9 is now a legacy system and it may not even support VR anymore. Or is it to improve CPU performance prior to implementation of Unreal Engine in the future?
I would say that, a switch to DirectX 11 or 12 or whatever it may be. I mean, the fact that we got VR working in DirectX 9 is almost close to a miracle, but
Yes,
we
I
somehow
agree.
managed it. But yeah, there's various areas who would benefit from that. Performance, features like VR, or even other post effects. We were looking into creating some sparks, new spark system or particle system in general.
Mm.
And those are certainly areas that would improve from a newer DirectX engine or newer DirectX. But I don't know how far we are with that process, so I don't know how much I can comment on that.
Yeah, no, that's okay. It was just an interesting story that came up during the week. And now I'd like to have a kind of a general discussion, if I may, just about motorsports in general, and then perhaps the future of RaceRoom, depending, of course, on what you guys have the ability to comment on. As a motorsport topic in general, there was the recent announcement of these hypercar regulations to replace LMP1 at Le Mans in 2020, 2021. So anyone got any thoughts on this as motorsport enthusiasts?
I personally myself, I do quite like the prototype, so I don't know what to think of the new regulation, but I've seen this what was it, Mercedes Project One car, concept car. It looked okay, but not quite as racy as the 919, for example. I somewhat prefer those prototypes, but maybe for the racing it's better in the future because we have seen manufacturers leaving and there's not many teams left. So if they have to go into that direction to have bigger grids and more exciting racing, then it's welcome on my side.
I guess it'll be bespoke race car class, maybe like back to the days of the McLaren F1 or the Porsche 911 GT1, kind of the fantasy race cars. And I assume if the regulations allow it, they may also include some kind of hybrid technology because the LMP cars have been doing it.
Yeah, I mean those cars that you mentioned, they're certainly very sexy cars. But for me, they are a bit too close to what is now the GTE or GTLM class.
Yes, that's also true.
So I don't know what would be the huge difference there. Maybe they're not running GTE anymore, but GT 3 or something along those lines.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Sorry, I was going to pick up from that. I when I think about those, well, the latest announced regulations, it's I just wonder whether I don't really know what to visualize, to be perfectly honest. I don't know whether it's going to be a throwback to sort of late 90s, with the GT1 Le Mans, because that was a brilliant era, but to be perfectly honest, when you look at those cars, they're not really that far removed from what we've currently got in P1. So
no,
I'm not really so sure what to think about it. It'll obviously transpire and be interesting. But one thing that I do have a little bit of a concern about is that surely something like that, like really, it invites manufacturer involvement, but does it require it as well? Is there a possibility there of alienating a lot of privateers?
That's true.
Yeah, well, I guess a lot of it will depend on the affordability. That's always a huge concern for private teams, of course.
Yeah.
But as long as they're still using combustion engines that sound great, then it's all good in my book.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I was just about to mention that, actually. I am quite curious to see when or where electric cars will kind of fit into those races. We have Formula E already, but I think I don't really know how to feel in general about electric cars in motorsports.
I think the technology is progressing very fast, and it's only a matter of a couple of years, I think, until we will see more and more and eventually exclusively electric race series. So I would reckon in about 10 to 20 years, I don't know if we're gonna still have race cars going around with fuel engines, combustion engines.
Well, let's hope so.
Unfortunately. Yeah, I hope so as well.
Yeah. Or maybe in the future, the only way to drive a V8 or a V12 or a V10 will actually be in a simulator. Maybe that'll be it.
Yeah, they will stay in the simulators for sure.
Yeah. So not only us non-race drivers who will be driving fantasy cars in the simulators, maybe the real race drivers will be doing it too.
Yeah, I thought about that. I thought about the possibility that maybe a car brand would release a car in the future just digitally, because you can't really drive that on the road anymore.
Yeah.
Because of regulations and all the kind of stuff. But maybe if simulations become more widespread and more popular, that maybe Ferrari says, hey, we'll just build a car, but you can drive it on the road, but you can drive it in a sim. Who knows?
Well, you've seen that Audi that it came out in Gran Turismo, right?
Yeah.
It came out in Gran Turismo as a concept car, as well as in reality. I think on same launch day. I don't know. I'm not quite sure, but
Yeah.
yeah, the digital world and the real world are definitely getting closer.
Merging.
Yeah. And that's like a remake of the IMSA GTO car, and it's also quattro and fully electric. Yeah.
True.
That's very interesting. Now, there's something that I made note of, and this is perhaps something that maybe a producer at Sector 3 could comment on, and I know as a studio that you guys are tied to KW, and in terms of what you can create, and a lot of focus is there to create software to support the simulator hardware side of the business, but could we speculate on the possibility of, in the future, like tracks like Le Mans or Sebring or Daytona ever appearing in RaceRoom, or for example the LMP1 hybrids or the Ford GT or a Ferrari or an Aston Martin? Now, for example, you have an LMP1 which is listed as under P1 in RaceRoom, but that's from 2011. So do you ever see the possibility, now maybe you can't comment or don't wish to, but do you ever see content like that ever appearing in RaceRoom?
Well, like I said earlier, never say never. Those are very interesting cars for sure, and I would not say that we're excluding those. But a lot of things depend on opportunities that we meet with partners like WTCR now or Mercedes. So if a business opportunity opens, then we are ready to make any cool car. So yeah, who knows?
Is there anything that you guys yourselves would like to see or like to have? Let's say hypothetically, anything at all, if it was possible. What would you like to see in RaceRoom that RaceRoom would benefit from, given that like the physics are good, the sounds are good, the force feedback is really good? What would you guys like to see?
Well, as you mentioned, the Le Mans prototypes are certainly interesting, but we will see what that class will be in a couple of years. I like endurance racing a lot, GT racing as well. Big fan of the VLN series on the Nordschleife, of course. You got all sorts of cars there, and actually quite many of those are either in the game already or on their way in the game. So yeah, I love racing on the Nordschleife with different cars, GTs, touring cars. And as you might know, I have a league called RaceRoom VLN. So
Yes.
we're racing there every 2 weeks with 3 different classes. So it's a lot of fun. So that is definitely my cup of tea.
So I think that I'd quite like to see some 80s sports cars, maybe some more GTOs would be really cool. I'd quite like to see some tracks to go with it as well. I mean, because you guys, maybe you know, maybe you don't, but back then in the 80s, over in the States, a lot of the circuits were street circuits. So, and really very fast, pretty hairy, 200 mile an hour street circuits. So it would be really cool to see some of those. And from sort of modern cars, I think that it might be really interesting. We've got the hill climb icons class.
Yes.
But time attack might be something really interesting to do. If we sort of look around the world, there are some really interesting cars being built, to do that. and some really, really advanced projects. So it would be really quite interesting maybe to do something like that and have 2 or 3 of those cars that are basically, very minimal rule book, very, very quick, pretty crazy things. So that would be really something interesting.
Speaking of classic content, but now that we have the DTM 95 Mercedes, I would love to add the other cars that were racing.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
That would be fantastic. But let's see what we can do there.
That's what Robert mentioned. He was a big touring car fan. And in terms of online racing now, I have to admit I'm not a great online racer. And one time I joined a session, I found a random session on RaceRoom, the RaceRoom servers, and it was practice at the Nordschleife. And I headed down the Nordschleife, and somebody came the other direction in an old BMW M3 and took me out. So I just thought, well, enough of this.
Oh, really?
So, yeah.
Actually, we have a setting that admins can enable that ghost cars that go the wrong direction.
Yes.
Yeah.
But are most people, I don't even know if most people are aware, there's this tool in Steam, which is great. You can actually set up your own server, which is great. But are most people, are they setting up their own server using the Steam tool? And are most of the servers that appear online, are they appearing from that tool, or are there servers that are set up, if you know what I mean?
Yeah, so we provide around, I think, 30 or 40 just open servers that are not password protected for everybody just to join. But we've seen a trend of a lot of leagues setting up their own servers and give out the passwords to members exclusively. But now we also have this community built racing system, sim racing system you might be familiar with.
Yeah, it's been added, I remember, yeah.
Yeah, it's an awesome way of doing online racing, in my opinion. I've been using it quite a lot in the past, and I will jump on it very soon again, I think.
Yeah. And in terms of online racing, for anybody listening to this, Georg, and to you, Alex, for somebody listening who wants to get into online, can you recommend a server they should try, or a server for a particular class, or using the sim racing system, or how should they start? Let's say, because I find, well, maybe I'm not so great in a particular car or particular track, and then I start in the race and I spin out, and then people kind of are head off in the distance, and I'm the last guy, and then I just quit. So for somebody just who has some time and looking to start online, where should they go? Well,
first thing I would recommend to you is not join these servers with the free content where everybody, they are usually very full with people who are not so serious about the online racing. So avoid those servers, and then any other server is usually pretty good, the racing. But of course, if you really want to get online races, you should join a community. And we have sections on the forums. We have a RaceRoom Discord server where people are inviting people to race. There's the race department club, of course, and various leagues that I would highly recommend. If you're serious about racing in a controlled environment with people that are taking it seriously, that is definitely the way to go. And also sim racing system.
Yes, I can link to the RaceRoom Discord below in the description. So that's pretty much it, I guess, unless there's anything anybody wants to discuss in terms of forthcoming events or features in RaceRoom.
Well, keep an eye out on WTCR content coming to RaceRoom very soon. Make sure you join the Mercedes e-racing competition where you can drive those classic Mercedes cars for free. And we just recently launched a Porsche e-racing championship with RaceRoom Russia, so you can drive that as well for free on the time attack. There's plenty more coming.
Look forward to having older content updated in more than just physics.
Okay.
And actually, if people let us know like which of the older content is sort of really like they feel like needs more love, that's always quite interesting to hear.
Okay. And where should they go to do that? Is that via the RaceRoom forums, or?
Yeah, via the RaceRoom forums is really the best place. You know, it's all there for us. If
I want to try 95 DTM Mercedes, the classic one. Is it so that I have to partake in the competition to try it out for free?
Yeah, that is currently the only way that you can drive this car in this competition. But of course, when time comes, we will be releasing the car as well. So you can drive it online and offline everywhere you want.
Okay. So eventually it'll be included anyway. Well, Alex and Georg, thank you very much for joining. I really
Thanks for having
appreciate your
us.
time.
Yeah, thanks very much for having us.
It's been an interesting discussion. I was looking to hopefully talk to you guys at one point, and thankfully I've been able to do it. So it's been really an enjoyable discussion, and thank you very much for joining.
Yeah, it's been fun.
Thank you.
As an addition to this episode, we'll be including a one-page quick car setup guide that Georg and Alex created. We'll include a link to it below in the video description on YouTube. If you enjoyed this episode, we would appreciate it that on YouTube you could add a like, and if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the channel, and also click the bell icon to receive notifications for future content. Also on YouTube, please feel free to leave any comments or questions in the comments section below. This episode will also be available on iTunes, Google Play and Stitcher podcast services. If you find that you cannot access those services in your area, there's also an RSS feed option to add to a podcasting app, or you can simply download the audio file. Instructions and links and any other information related to this episode will be included in the video description of this episode on YouTube. So until next time, thank you.